as you can see, we're all here and really excited about today's webinar. Okay, so a very big welcome to the PRCA's charity and non-profit groups Best Practice in Creative Campaigning Showcase. We're delighted to be reflecting today on two award-winning campaigns, one of which won the PRCA's DARE Award 2025, and the other which won Purpose 2026 award. So thank you very much for joining us and joining our panelists, Tom Chapman, who is campaigns manager at the Health Foundation, and Christy Buitt from Leopard, who is client services director. And your clients must have been extremely happy, Christy, with you winning the PRCA award. And I'm joined by Paige Patrick, who's digital media and marketing manager at the Resuscitation Council and is a member of our PRCA committee, a very loyal member. So we're going to start with Tom. And what we'd love, please, is if you could pop any questions in the Q&A, and we will do, we'd love to kind of discuss your questions at the end of each presentation. So Tom is going to be sharing his reflections on the Hazmat loungewear campaign that actually won two campaign awards. Won the Purpose 2026 Healthcare Cause campaign, and also a media award. So over to you, Tom, from Wroxhill.
Thank you, Nikki. I'll just share my screen. Can you please just confirm that you can see
Yes.
the presentation? Brilliant. So yeah, thank you everyone. I'm going to talk to you about our most recent campaign, which is called Hazmat Loungewear. I'll just talk you through the background behind the campaign, how it came about, what we did, and the success that we've achieved from it to date and ongoing. So as Nikki's already mentioned, hello, I'm Tom. I work as campaigns manager for Health Equals. So Health Equals is part of the Health Foundation, which is a larger organisation, but Health Equals is actually a charity, and it's a coalition of 120 plus organisations across different sectors that all are basically looking to create a fairer society when it comes to our health, no matter who we are, where we work, where we live, etc. And as part of Health Equals also, we have a fantastic, what we call a parliamentary champions network. So we have supporters directly from House of Commons Member of Parliament. We've got 115 plus. It's done a really great job from Public Affairs. So we work very closely together on campaigning activity. The main thing, just as a brief background before I go into the main campaign itself, just to give you context of what we're campaigning about. At a macro level, we're highlighting really stark health inequalities in the UK. So right now in the UK, there's a 16-year life expectancy gap. So someone born and living potentially within an area of Glasgow, for example, could expect to live 16 years less than someone living in an area, in a more affluent area in London, for example. And that's nearly 2 decades of life lost. And that's due to what we call the building blocks of health. And these are things that are basically missing or crumbling for people. So that's secure work, good education, where you live, access to green space, toxic air, etc. And one of the campaigns, or one of the areas that we focused on for this campaign was specifically around homes, so where we live. And we all deserve a safe, stable, secure place to live. But Right now, obviously, people are experiencing a loss in life expectancy, and some lives are actually being lost due to living conditions, and especially damp, cold, and mouldy homes. And there is a law that came into effect last year, which was Awaab's Law, that was introduced for the social housing sector, whereby tenants of social housing, when they issue complaints of damp and mold, the landlords have to respond within 24 hours in order to get those problems fixed as a result of what tragically happened to little Awaab. That doesn't exist in the private rented sector. In fact, those same standards won't come into effect for another 10 years. So that's something we wanted to raise awareness of, that is a bigger problem beyond the social housing sector, and it's affecting a lot of the population in terms of health, and that obviously has impacts on society in general. So we have a provocation that we gave to our agency. It was really about, if your home's making you sick, how are you going to survive it, essentially? So it's been really sort of coming up with an absurd idea. We at Health Equals do bold campaigning, sort of as part of our DNA, essentially, and we didn't want our campaign to be sort of like a typical public health campaign. We needed something to really cut through, and be distinctive also amongst our members, like Crisis and Shelter, who do great campaigning work in this area. We need to be distinctive. We can't come across as sort of the same in that way. So as mentioned, we are facing into challenges that the campaign had to meet, and from our own research, we did bespoke research. We basically recreated the English housing survey, but across the 4 nations, and basically found that 1 in 4 people, that's sort of 15 million plus, are living with damp, cold, or mouldy conditions. It really just shows that, the homes that we are living in, especially in the private rented sector and the social housing sector, many of them are harming our health, and that's due to damp, cold, and mold, and cutting life short. And so we really needed to transform this apathy into urgency, just making people more aware of this topic. So from that, what we wanted to do is expose the health inequalities happening inside people's homes, reframe that housing is a public health emergency. Our long-term ambition as Health Equals is to get all government departments considering health. Right now, it's just the Department of Health and Social Care, believe it or not. But if you think of climate and the environment, that is largely considered by transport, housing, etc. Our health as individuals and the public isn't. And so what we also wanted to do is mobilise people to contact their MPs to join Health Equals, and also talk about the standards that need to apply to the public private rented sector, sorry. We also knew that a lot of people need to experience or have lived experience, or at least know or be closely associated to this, in order to feel a need or feel moved behind this. So we needed to make sure that the creative that we had was visceral, that could bring this to life in a way that someone who's maybe not experiencing this would sort of stop in their tracks, or on their scrolling in their feeds, to understand what's going on. So really, our brief then, in terms of taking that strategy that the creative team needed to come up with, was making that invisible undeniable. So reframing that unsafe housing as a toxic health hazard, essentially. And how do you protect yourselves in an environment that you're supposed to be safe in every day, and your family is supposed to be safe in? So we wanted this to be tangible, we wanted it to be visual, and we wanted, obviously, to people to basically not ignore what was going on. So the idea that came back from our creative agency, amongst many, one stood out, which was, to begin with, quite shocking, in the sense of it was different. And when you know that something's a little bit different and maybe makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable, you've got onto some good creative, essentially. And we got this concept back called hazmat loungewear, which is basically taking hazmat suits and then turning those into, I suppose, protective clothing that can be used in the home, and coming up with a statement, clothes for unfit home. One of the interesting things, or one of the debates that we had, is those images that you see there are AI. And so we're almost like, well, do we actually need to sort of bring this campaign to life physically, I suppose, as you traditionally would, because sort of as you work with AI, you could make it better. And I suppose that's a big consideration at the moment in terms of budget, quality. But one thing we wanted to do was sort of make sure that we honoured those with lived experience really, and we needed to make sure that we humanised this. So we decided to make the decision to actually recreate this in real life. And so what we ended up with, which is what you see here, is the hazmat loungewear idea that has then been taken forward and produced in real life, essentially. So we had costume designers, we had a shoot and set, of which we had moving image, etc. And it was a great decision to do that in real life, not only because you're helping those with crafts and things to come together to produce the campaign, but also we could use this in a different way beyond just static and motion sort of images and video. We could take that and bring that to life in real life with an actual stunt. So one thing with the creative, we were very conscious that it is an absurd solution to a real problem. And so you're treading a fine line of, I suppose, shock for the need of getting visibility, but also these are we're representing real people's lives here. People are facing this day to day. 15 million people are experiencing something, but there are people at the sharp end, those in the private and social housing sector, and a lot of them are families that are dealing with this day in, day out. And so we, as a creative sort of process, go through working closely with what we call a campaign advisory group. So we have members from across grassroots organisations across the UK that come together as part of the creative process, that go through this and talk through this with us, and also help decide on the actual creative ideas. And they actually like the hazmat loungewear idea, so we've got a thumbs up there. We also work with experts and lived experience. And one thing that we did do was ensure that we were sensitive, because we were coming out with a campaign when Awaab's Law was just about to be introduced. So we engaged with Awaab's family via their lawyers to ensure that they had visibility of what we were doing and ensure that we were sensitive to the topic, but also to them. We obviously tested messaging, communities, etc., and making sure that that bold creativity is being considerate and not just shocking for shocking's sake. And so we also had those assets that we distributed across paid social media, as well as across like Meta, Reddit, etc. But we also brought the moment to life. So we brought this sort of fake fashion brand to life for clothing to wear in the home, on a Soho street. So we did a shop front. We had that family that we had within the actual photo shoot come in and do that. We had housing campaigners like Quajo, who were very supportive of the campaign, who have helped to push for the social housing and Awaab's Law. And essentially, we also had celebrity support from Martin Roberts, who does Homes Under the Hammer, and sort of give it some credibility from a point of view from homes, but also he's very supportive of this issue as well. And we had a video crew on there that captured this and distributed this through wires, etc., and make sure that we get exposure. What we achieved from this was really two hits. So we not only got a lot of coverage in support of the new Awaab's Law, so we were the sort of go-to voice with regards to the Awaab's Law in the media, which we're not the usual suspects. So the usual suspects would be some of our coalition members, which we did actually put forward interviews to, but we were featured within the news in support of Awaab's Law, but also then within more of the consumer press, we had this narrative featured around hazmat loungewear, and really raising awareness of the topic of health inequalities, which doesn't get a lot of mentions within the media, but obviously the topic of damp, cold and mouldy homes as well, especially coming up to the time of Christmas. So in terms of results, lots of media coverage, which was really great, national and regional. Website traffic was phenomenal in terms of increase, and that was due to the bold creative that essentially amplified the return on investment with regards to some of the spend we did because the creative was so bold and stopped people in their tracks that you obviously get reduced cost per click because it's better creative essentially, so more people were coming through. Lots of video views on that, and we had many people email their MP about this topic as well, which they could enter their postcode and check their life expectancy on our website. So I've got a short 2-minute video to share just to hopefully bring this to life and summarize really what I've just said, probably in a better a better format. Let me
damp and mold.
Damp.
so that was
Damp
just
and mold.
a very quick summary. I suppose in terms of real world impact, as I mentioned, there's a 10-year delay in getting the decent home standard applied to the private rented sector. Um, but as a broader mission for Health Equals, we're raising awareness of health inequalities. And off the back of this campaign and some of the great work that our public affairs agencies doing with us, the public contacting MPs means that MPs sign up to our Parliamentary Champions Network, and they in turn then talk about our campaign and the topic of life expectancy and health inequalities in the Houses of Commons. And as a result, what we've got recently is amendments to the health bill going through Parliament at the moment, talking about health equalities specifically. So all this sort of work contributes to the broader mission that we're doing around basically putting a duty on ministers to consider our health across all areas of government, and then broader that should become for all government departments beyond just those ministers themselves. And that is everything from me.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was a really incredible and provocative campaign, I'd say, that clearly had some very real world impact there. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to drop them in our Q&A box or chat. I selfishly had one myself. I'm really interested in the health inequality space. It's something that we look into a lot here at Resuscitation Council as well. And in terms of your MP activation, I just wondered if there was any particular facet, that because you did so much across digital in real life, all of that, was there one tactic that really worked in terms of getting people to actually fill in that MP letter that you saw across the board?
A lot of the work comes through, or those letters come through from people either coming directly from paid social, so it's deliberately designed to funnel that user journey, or through our postcode life expectancy tool. So when people go across, I mean, we've tested this multiple times. One of the things that really gets people talking about and the topic of health inequalities and how health isn't just influenced by personal choice, is life expectancy. And so when people look at why are people dying, why is there a 16-year gap, which we always use as messaging across our campaign materials, regardless if we're talking about housing or toxic air or etc., then what they can then do is go and check their own postcode because it's making it personal to them. But also that then funnels people through to really, if they do feel a sense of injustice, why isn't my MP doing something about this actually, or I might be living in a home like this, or my friends, or etc., then I'll email my MP and say, look, Health Equals are doing something, about this, want to do something about this, you should be part of this campaign. But equally, you should also be ensuring that you're voting or supporting the Decent Home Standard and everything else, damp, cold, mouldy homes. It's a
Absolutely.
complicated topic, health inequalities, as you probably know. And I suppose the housing is a very big topic amongst the public, as it should be. And so it's almost a Trojan horse to get people in and start learning more about health inequalities. Yeah.
Absolutely, and the personalization aspect is so important these days. We have a couple of questions in the chat, which I'll feed through. So we've got one from Jonathan, which is about how did you connect the clothing concept back to the wider issue of health inequality?
How do we connect the
Clothing concept back to the wider issue of health inequality. So I wonder here if Jonathan's sort of touching on like where that idea came from and how it kind of connected back to the wider issue.
Yeah, so this was a building block specific campaign of which we've done. So using the hazmat, we haven't used the hazmat suit beyond housing and damp, cold, and mouldy homes. So we wanted an area to focus in, or some creative concept to bring that subject to life that was unique to us. And through that, we can then on our website, and what we talk about is how this is just one part of the wider, what are building blocks of health that create health inequalities. So I don't know if that answers the question, because we do focus on life expectancy and lives being cut short as really the link to health inequalities. But the hazmat suits highlight the inequalities that people experience within their homes who are suffering from damp, cold, and mold.
Thanks, Tom. There was another question here about how you made sure the campaign still felt sensitive, and I suppose a lot of this might be connected to the sort of talking to these advisory groups and testing your messaging.
Yeah, definitely. So we did all that testing with, like I say, a campaign advisory group. So we present them what our agency presents us. So 4Ideas, for example, and these are all people who represent those on the front line who are suffering from health inequalities, but influence across many different building blocks, and many of them are specialists in housing. We then also consult our members in the housing sector. We also did lived experience consultation. Quajo, we also consult with him as someone who's a massive advocate around social housing and mainstream advocate of that. And everyone was supportive of it. There were some sensitivities, but we hopefully navigated those by making sure that it was seen as absurd, and the language that we used was an absurd solution to a real problem. So we really tried to mitigate as much as possible to make it as sensitive to the issue as possible.
Definitely. And we've got another question here from Helen, who, by the way, says it's a brilliant and creative campaign. They want to know if you are aware of any shift in attitudes or behaviours from landlords as a result of your campaign.
Not directly in terms of landlords themselves, because we're not tracking that. What we did track was attitudinal shifts in relation to the topic of health inequalities and damp, cold, and mold. So we have a tracker that we do at a broader level for all of our campaigns that looks at basically attribution, but really sort of we have exposed, non-exposed groups, etc. And our main objective is to understand, do our campaigns shift people's point of view to the topic of health inequalities, and that our health is influenced by other things, not just individual choice. And that we do see that increase. The biggest, I suppose, takeout from here is that what we did find was that we would make a significant difference statistically if we had more budget to invest on, and that's typical with many campaigns. So if we had like government do, maybe, multi-million pound above the line media budgets, if we broadcast that nationally, we would see statistically more people agreeing with the point of view of their world and it is influencing our health, but also we would see attitudes definitely shift towards this topic as well as the broader issue. Yeah, that's a bit long-winded, but not specifically landlords.
No, brilliant. And I think the topic of sort of budget is always top of mind with charities, and we always wish we could do more with more. We've got time for one more question, I think. We've got one more in the chat. This is from an anonymous attendee, but they say your campaign was great and linked the issue to life expectancy. What's your top tip for someone designing a campaign for a health issue that affects part and not necessarily the entire population? So when you're really specifically looking at one type of group of individuals, I suppose. This person says they're currently working on cancer care and would love some insights.
I'd start obviously working directly with that audience to help shape the campaign, working with lived experience specifically. Audit campaigns that have already been done and carve a space out that's unique, which is what we did. A lot of the campaigns we looked at, if we just went out of damp, cold, and mouldy homes as sort of the visual and nothing else, we might not have got the cut through, which is why, I suppose the garish sort of ridiculous suit stood out. It enabled us as the campaign to not only stand out within a category of housing, but also within people's feeds as well. So that would be my biggest advice is, if you can be bold and work with those that have lived experience to be bold with, because you'll find that you could then be distinctive in some way.
And I love the point about auditing other campaigns. We can learn so much. That's why we're here. We're learning from each other. And being able to spot where there are gaps is so useful to us all. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Tom. I think I found it incredibly useful. I think a lot of people in the chat are also saying this too. Shall we pass along? Nikki, do you want to introduce Christy?
Yes. So thank you very much, everybody, for such interesting and varied questions. And thank you, Tom, for your presentation and Paige for hosting those questions. And now we're moving to Christy Buett, who's going to be talking about Leopard's campaign for Sifa Farside, Inequality Street, giving the toffee finger.
Hi, thank you. I feel like I should have gone before Tom because I don't have a very beautifully packaged up sexy video to demonstrate again. So mine probably won't look as interesting.
You've got lovely slides.
But that was a beautiful video. Just listen to presenter mode. There with. There we go. So So yes, today I'm going to talk to you about a campaign we did called Inequality Street, which was a campaign we delivered back in December 2024, actually, for a charity called Cypher Fireside. So they exist to support homelessness in and around the Midlands. So when we talk about marketing success, obviously some of the first things that kind of jump to mind is engagements, impressions, reach, media coverage. But I know for charities that actually one of the biggest end goals is donations and fundraising. And so I wanted to start my presentation today with just giving you one figure, and that's plus 37.54% in donations. And that's the ultimate goal that we incurred through our campaign, which, as you can imagine, for our client, they were super happy with. My second figure was 2,300% social reach. And so obviously that's a great marketing figure, but actually without having got to the donations, then that wouldn't really meant an awful lot, because obviously we know how every donation obviously means that we're getting somebody who's choosing to care, who's obviously which can mean a drastic difference for the people that the charity is serving. And essentially what I'm going to present today is, as Nikki said, was one of our award-winning campaigns. So just a very quick introduction of who I am. I'm Christy. I work at Leopard Co. We're a full service agency. I've been here for about 12 years now, and I've worked on both sides of the coin, in-house and agency. But for a big stretch of my career, worked with a whole host of different charities, including obviously Cypher Fireside, but with the likes of the Heart Foundation, Cancer Council in Australia. Leopard Co. worked with the YMCA for about 8 years, as well as a whole host of other charities. But fundamentally, obviously, when we get to work with charities, it means we're actually creating campaigns that create genuine impact. I work on a lot of consumer brands and in the hospitality sector, and it's never quite the same knowing that you're just making other rich people richer. Doing something where, you know, as cheesy as it sounds, you're changing lives, then actually it really is something that makes me passionate about doing what I do. So the challenge then for the brief that we had, believe it or not, actually wasn't, the biggest challenge wasn't homelessness. The issue that we served was that actually compassion fatigue was a huge thing with homelessness. So the scale of homelessness in the UK is really hard to actually quantify. At the time of taking this brief, the big issue had reported that there was a 10% increase in the number of households living in temporary accommodation, which was in and around 112,000 families, which is a huge amount. That's actually 146,000 children. But people don't seem to be able to associate those numbers. We know that homelessness exists, but I think we've all got so used to seeing it. I mean, you only have to come off the train in your local city and you'll see people most probably who are homeless. And I think we've just all got to that point where that fatigue of that oversaturation has kind of led people to know that it's happening, but not necessarily want to support and do something about it. We also had a challenge of that. The charity came to us at Christmas time, and as you know, it's an incredibly saturated market, one of the busiest fundraising periods of the year. So we had to really try and cut through. We know every charity has a campaign, every brand has an advert, there's heaps of content, and we needed to figure out a way of being able to cut through that. So really our challenge became, how do we make people stop scrolling and actually start caring again? So when we looked at Christmas, the one thing we kept on coming back to was that actually it's a season built around abundance. So Christmas, the expectation is that, you know, it's filled with joy, celebration. We've got, you know, hopefully we're all going to receive lots of lovely gifts. There's going to be lots of overindulgence, overeating, spending time with family and friends, and there's just that general feeling of warmth. Yet for someone actually experiencing homelessness, the reality actually represents something completely different. You know, for them, they're homeless, they are cold, they're likely in debt and isolated with very few people, if anyone, around them. And obviously life is filled with so much uncertainty. And for us, that contrast actually felt incredibly powerful. It was almost uncomfortable, really, that we're a nation living in such polar opposite extremes. And for us, that's what we felt we really wanted to lean into. So rather than competing against Christmas, we decided to really use Christmas itself to try and tell the broader story. So when we got our heads together, we thought, well, what if we took something that was instantly recognizable at Christmas and used it to tell a completely different story? So we were looking at lots of different brands, and I think, you know, if I was to ask everybody here today kind of what brands spring to mind, there's Heats, isn't there? There's John Lewis, there's all the supermarkets, there's Cadbury's. But for us, we instantly said, well, there's Quality Street, you know, that's the nation's favorite, most recognizable Christmas chocolate brand. And that's exactly where Inequality Street was born. So this idea was actually gifted to us by an agency called Shook in London. And as I say, was inspired by Quality Streets that everybody knows and loves. So it was essentially a bit of a parody campaign that was designed really just to stop people in its tracks. So instead of using and celebrating Christmas treats, every chocolate essentially highlighted a really different issue that was associated with homelessness and poverty. So as you can probably see on the screen there, we had things like the last penny, the debt triangle, the what the fudge. So suddenly something that became so familiar actually became very, very uncomfortable. And that was exactly the point that we were trying to achieve. So each chocolate actually represented a very different challenge when it came to people experiencing homelessness. So this could be anything from debt, addiction, temporary accommodation, poor mental health. And the reason it worked was it enabled us to actually take something incredibly creative and talk about something really, really difficult. It took obviously a very complex social issue and made it instantly understandable. You know, people didn't need to sit and read a long white paper or a report to really understand the stats and the dramaticness of what people who are homeless are actually having to live with at Christmas time. So one of the biggest things I think we can learn is that actually creativity doesn't need to be overly complex. It should actually simplify the complexity of any messaging. But one of the things that we had to kind of address was, once we'd landed on that idea, was actually, you know, was it a bit bold? Was we, you know, were people going to think that we were trivializing homelessness? We didn't want, you know, obviously it's such a big issue and one that we need to take with a lot of care and sensitivity. But, you know, we didn't want anyone to think that, you know, we were kind of humorizing it in any way. But I think what actually gave us the confidence was that we're not making light of homelessness. We were actually making people feel uncomfortable about ignoring it. And I think that's really the sort of like the distinction with the campaign, that every single chocolate represented a genuine issue experienced by people facing homelessness. So there was real insight in every piece of creative, and the humour simply created that kind of doorway into sort of a much more serious conversation. So we kind of thought with the campaign that there was sort of like some key principles, that we know that people don't just donate because of lots of stats and, you know, you telling them something. In order to make people donate, we need to make people feel before asking them to give, because we know that people donate emotionally and then afterwards they'll justify that decision logically. So instead of facing lots of facts, we led with feeling. So we essentially took to the streets with these newly branded box of chocolates, and had lots of different community events whereby we were selling the chocolates, and we had lots and lots of people coming over. I mean, the intrigue that first it gives, because you kind of sort of recognize the brand, but it feels a bit different. Is this a new line of Quality Street? Is it it's a twist? But then actually, when we got people over, you know, people were smiling and thinking, oh, what's this? But then they recognized it immediately. But then they started reading, and that's when it kind of shifted the tone a little bit. That emotional shift then was exactly what we wanted, because it really started people questioning and talking about what the real matter and the issue in hand was. And so then that's at that point when we really started to make them feel something. And at that point, we were able to kind of ask them to donate. It wasn't just the one creative execution. The idea was then pushed across many channels. So we delivered the idea through PR and social media. As I say, we had multiple community events whereby we were going out, interacting with the local community and selling the boxes of chocolates. We had lots of creative assets that were then rolled out through the different channels, and we ran a local radio campaign. So One Strong Idea essentially had multiple touch points, and this slide just shows just some of those executions. Really, every channel kind of reinforcing that same message, no matter which audience we were talking to, because obviously in terms of our target audience, this is everyone of all ages, you know. So we had to be able to slice the campaign up through social to be able to engage that younger demographic, go out to the local community who maybe aren't as digitally driven, but as well as trying to create that general national awareness through PR. So the results of the campaign, as I say, it comes back to, for us, Christmas donations was the most important thing that we needed to get out of this. So almost 40% in donations year on year for us was that standout result. It meant that Cypher Fireside had more funding for the vital services that support the people of the local community who are experiencing homelessness. We increased the social reach, which we knew reached around 117,000 people. And the campaign generated plenty of national press. We managed to get the CEO on BBC Radio West Midlands for quite an in-depth conversation. And we managed to get some industry recognition through the trade press. And obviously, as Nikki mentioned, we were an award finalist. But above all, really, the best thing was actually the feedback that we got from the client. That kind of really meant the most for us. They described the campaign as being a step change in how they position the charity to the public, which for us is just a real emphasis on how important campaigns like this can be for a small charity, and knowing that this then changed how the way in which they did things moving forward was really sort of the recognition for us. And that quote means far more than I think any award or any coverage would ever mean, because being able to know that we've made such a change to the charity spoke volumes. I was trying to think about some of the questions you might ask me, and I thought we might say, would I do anything differently? And yeah, I actually would. No campaign is perfect. And I think looking back, there are a couple of things that I'd probably look to improve. I think involving people who are lived in experience probably earlier on in the process is something that I would have done. We work very closely with Cypher Fireside from the get-go, but service users weren't introduced until a bit further down the line. And I think actually, and I think Tom, you mentioned, like, it's really important to kind of have people who, you know, who the charity are aiming to target and working with as part of this from the very beginning. Secondly, I think I'd look to create a little bit more of a smoother digital journey. We did a lot of the donations through the community events, but I think reflecting back, there was actually opportunity to be able to involve donations through the multiple digital touch points that we had. So I think, again, that's something that I would look to implement if we was to do this again. And then finally, I'd actually extend the campaign beyond Christmas, because I think it did have a longer life cycle, despite the fact Quality Streets is obviously something we typically associate with Christmas. I think there was still more that we could have done with the campaign to kind of keep the conversation and fundraising momentum going post that December period. So I just thought I would leave you on sort of like 3 lessons that I thought every charity marketer could learn from. Firstly, not competing for attention. I think if you've got something that's worth talking about, then you don't need to be competing in that space, and you can create your own movement. Secondly, let fundraising shape your creativity. Like, the creativity shouldn't sit alongside your fundraising objective. It really needs to exist because of it. And finally, you don't need the biggest budget. This campaign was actually delivered all pro bono, and the success came from the collaboration, the insight, and the confidence, really, to be able to take that creative risk. So it's not necessarily always about having the biggest spend, which I know sometimes is always the first question that's asked: how much have we got? But a lot can be done with very little. And that's everything. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Christy. Really interesting to see that interweaving of creativity with fundraising objectives and also issues awareness raising. So I'd just like to kick off with a question. Compassion fatigue is a really, really important issue. So how did CIFA express that challenge to you? What was the challenge with compassion fatigue? Was it an issue concerning donations, that a kind of trend in donations that they'd spotted? How were they experiencing compassion fatigue?
Yeah, it was donations, hence
Yeah.
as well whilst that was such an important goal for us. They knew that over time those donations were decreasing, yet homelessness was increasing. And I think because homelessness is something that everyone knows exists, that fatigue was definitely something that they could contribute to why donations had been going down over time.
Great. Okay, so the campaign really addressed that with the increase in donations very specifically. Thank you. We've got a question, which is anonymous. How did you link each chocolate back to real experiences faced by people experiencing homelessness?
So that was the wonderful skill of our creative director, who was able to. We obviously started out with really fully understanding with Cypher Fireside exactly all the different issues that people with homelessness face, and having those issues side by side to then be able to just subtly weave them into which one of the chocolates and the characteristics of a chocolate we can creatively link together. So yeah, it was definitely worth having our creative director on board there rather than just linking anyone together. But I think most importantly, it was about really understanding what are the issues, the breadth of issues that homeless people with homelessness face, and really being able to make sure that we can creatively communicate that in a way that would immediately cut through.
Great, thank you. And we've got a question from Helen. Thank you, Helen. How long did it take from receiving the brief to launching the campaign? And was that timeline as expected?
I think Cypher Fireside came to us in the October, and then we had to get it live come mid-November. So it was a quick turnaround. I feel that's the story of my life working in agency. And no, probably the timeline didn't stick strictly to what we needed it to. There's always hurdles you have to overcome, but ultimately we need, Christmas wasn't moving for anybody, so we needed to try and stay on track as best we can. But obviously, as with anything, there's always things that can slow things down, but then we have to try and get back on track as soon as we can. I would love to have spoken to Cypher a lot earlier on in the year, because we could have had a lot more time to think about things. But I think ultimately we landed on something that was really effective and impactful. But like with any marketer, we'd all love more time to be able to deliver these things. But thankfully at Leopard, we have a big team, and we had a lot of people, a lot of hands on deck to get this across the line in the tight timings that we had.
Great. And Jonathan has got a question. Were there any results that surprised you?
Um, no, I think the national coverage was perhaps a little bit harder than what we thought to be able to get, and it's I think predominantly I suppose it was because we were in a very saturated market, and there is we're fighting against a lot of other people with compelling narratives as well. So potentially that, but I mean, in the end, we managed to get there, and we got the reach and the coverage that we wanted. But I suppose, like with anything, sometimes you hope that it's going to be an easier sell, but yeah, we got there in the end.
Great. And someone anonymous has asked a question. If fundraising was not the key objective and the main issue was awareness creation or policy action, would you change anything about the campaign? If yes, what would you have tweaked?
Oh, good question. I think awareness, no. Ultimately that the campaign, that's what it was, exactly what it was doing. We obviously had a job to do in terms of translating awareness into donation. It couldn't have been just that because fundamentally the campaign, sorry, the charity, they needed that donations. So I think awareness was definitely achieved, and I would 100% do the same campaign for that reason. Policy action, I don't know. I'd have to think about that really, but I think ultimately the campaign was set out to try and catch people off guard, cut people in their tracks, and really get them to stop and think about an issue that was incredibly important. And I think maybe we may have tweaked some of the messaging depending on what the end goal was, but ultimately that's what the creative did for us, and we were able to have honest conversations. We were able to educate, and I think no matter what the end goal was, that still would have achieved that.
Okay, thank you. Just another question. I mean, you delivered the campaign. It sounds quite locally. It was a kind of regional campaign.
Yeah.
But then you had a big social reach. So in terms of kind of geographically tracking that reach, what did you find in terms of that?
Well, it is there. So Cypher Fireside are a Midlands charity. So
Yeah.
I mean, the Midlands is very large. So that kind of stemmed quite far and wide. But we were able to track across the Midlands. Nationally, there wasn't as much in terms of the social reach, but then that was never our end
Yeah.
goal. So
Yeah.
yeah, we were able to look at kind of exactly where within the Midlands, and then that data was pretty useful for the charity in terms of kind of moving forward with their social activity and areas that they needed to focus on and target moving forward.
Great. And it sounds, given the seasonality of it, that it's something that you could use in future with them with perhaps a different, you know, angle on it. Is that something that you think you might do?
Yeah, oh yeah, we would love to. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I think as I say, the campaign definitely has more longevity,
Mm.
and we could definitely go back for round two. I think there was even more ideas that the team had when we were kind of brainstorming and thinking about how to execute. So yeah, I mean, if we had the opportunity, then that would be great.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And I'm going to hand over to Paige.
Thank you, Nikki.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, both of you did incredible presentations there. For me, really, I think what I took from it was that harnessing emotions was both in both campaigns so important, especially when tackling apathy. Because it seemed like in both campaigns there was a sense of apathy with homelessness, with mold and health inequalities, and being able to drive emotion drives the action. Um, Even when we're looking at things that could make us uncomfortable. And I think leaning into discomfort is something that especially as charities, sometimes we can struggle with. But I think both these campaigns have proven that actually that is where we need to be sometimes in that space. But yeah, and especially as well, both campaigns seem to have quite an integrated approach to them. You know, you are looking across media, but you're also in person and out there, whether it's with the shop or with the tins on the street, and having quite tangible things for people to get involved with. Something really important for us all to think about as well is how we can bring things online, but also bring things in person, especially now that people are out and about a bit more and doing things in reality. But thank you both so much, Tom and Christy. I think everyone here, there's been so much chat in the chat about how brilliant the campaigns were. So if I could do a virtual round of applause for you both. And thank you as well to the PRCA, Kiri, Nikki, and Becky and Desiree, who are part of our group as well. Thank you for helping us create this event, and hopefully we'll be able to see some of you at our next event, which we'll be sharing details about soon enough. So I think that's it from us here.
Thank you very much.